Hi folks, today we're going to learn how to use a JavaScript library called Chart.js that allows you to make charts and graphs using JavaScript. So Chart.js is they call it a simple yet flexible JavaScript charting library for designers and developers. And I think that's true. There's a lot of JavaScript charting libraries out there, some of them very simple, some of them more complex. I think Charts.js is a good balance between not being too complex from a coding perspective, but also being rather flexible and allowing you to create the charts that you want to create using JavaScript, and also to customize them. And it's fairly well documented. It's been around for a while. Of course, the best charting library for JavaScript is D3.js, and Chart.js is sort of a good starting point before you get to D3. And in the coming weeks, we'll talk a little bit more about sort of how to use Chart.js in a more advanced way, and then I'll also get you guys started on D3 a little bit. But for now, this class is all about just sort of creating really basic charts and graphs using Chart.js. Okay, so for this week, what we're going to do is we're going to use some data from Gapminder. And I downloaded the data and I've run some pivot tables and done a little bit of work, but mostly what we're looking at is global data, looking at different countries around the world. We'll look at top 50 countries by population, top 10 by life expectancy and GDP. We're going to look at GDP by per capita and region, life expectancy in the largest countries in the world over time. So all the data has already been worked for this, and it will be available for you guys. I have made a class Chart.js guide, which I hope is useful for you, and you'll find in the class links and also in this week's class page. So definitely keep this handy because I think it'll be really useful for you as you go along. So it has links to the Chart.js documentation, which is really nice, which we'll take a look at in a couple minutes. I have put together code templates for you guys, and that's what we're going to go over today. We're going to look at the starting template, how to do a basic bar chart, how to add a little bit of extras to a bar chart, a line chart, and a scatter plot. And then in our advanced Chart.js, next week we'll look at the polar area chart and the radar chart. So the first thing that we want to do that I want to talk about is just how to set up a Chart.js project and how to sort of set up just a basic starting template. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to open my Finder and just start like a folder to work in this morning. So I'll just do it on my desktop. I'll call it Charts.js training. And I'm just going to go ahead and open that in Visual Studio Code, and it'll go ahead and pop up here. And so what we want is we want to start out with three documents in our folder. Okay, we're going to set up a index.html, a style.css, and a javascript.js. And I'll just go ahead and start those, even though they'll be blank for right now. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. We'll just start a new document. I'll call it index.html. I'm going to start one called style.css and one called javascript.js. Great. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to just set up sort of a basic Chart.js template. And all this code all the code we're going to look at today is available to you guys. And it's especially for this template, it's all just typed right here. So we'll just go through this and go ahead and set it up. So the first thing we want to do is we just want to set up the sort of just the scaffolding for an HTML page. And I'll just paste that in. And what we're going to do today is instead of making you guys watch me type every single character, I'm going to do copy and paste and then just talk about what the code chunks that we're looking at mean. I think that'll be a little bit easier. And frankly, that's probably how you'll be working as you work as well. Okay, so hopefully this looks familiar. Oh, I think I put that in so I want to put this in my index.html file. And this is just some boilerplate HTML, right? We're starting our HTML document where we've got a head section that just has a couple meta tags and a title tag. We've got our body section where the content for our page goes, and we're closing our HTML. Great, so I'll go ahead and save that. And I'm gonna go ahead and open this so we can see it. And that'll open, I've got a window here. We can see there's nothing there. Okay, that's actually what we want right now because we haven't added anything, right? And you can see I'm actually using a plugin for Visual Studio Code called, it's a Go Live. It adds a web server to Visual Studio Code, and you can download that and it'll make things a little bit easier, but you could also just open this file. You know, we could go to into the folder that we just made and we could open the index.html file from right here. The nice thing about this internet server plugin for Visual Studio Code is that every time you save, it automatically updates your page, which just makes things a little bit easier. But you would have to download this separately inside of Visual Studio Code. Okay, so let's keep going here. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to call in the code for Chart.js. So we're going to go ahead and insert this little piece of code here right in the head section of our HTML. So I'm going to go up into my head section and I'm going to paste that. And so what we see here is we're calling in the Chart.js library. And we're doing that through something called a CDN, a content distribution network. And that's just someplace online that is hosting this library for us so we can pull it in to our page and use it. You could also host it locally and call it locally. I think for our purposes, this is probably the easiest way to do it. But if you don't include this, you really can't use Chart.js. This is pulling in the library itself for us to be able to use. Okay, next we're going to link to our style sheet. We're also going to do that in the head section. And this is just good practice, right? We don't actually have anything in our style sheet yet. But you can see it's linking to style.css, which is right here. So any styles that we add in our style sheet should be pulled into our page through this link rel that we've added right here. Okay, next we want to call in the JavaScript file that we just created, that javascript.js. And for Chart.js, we're going to do that down here right above the closing body tag. So I'm just going to put that right there. And I'll put all my content above it, and that'll call in this file, that javascript.js, which actually is where we're going to do most of our work today. So this is basically the template for Chart.js. The last thing we want to add is in the body of our HTML page, we want to add this tag here that calls in a canvas HTML element and gives it an ID of my chart. Okay, so when we create our chart in Chart.js, our chart's going to appear right here. And once we start actually doing some scripting here in a second, you'll see how that works. Okay, so this is our basic template, and we can save this. We could save this as, say, like Chart.js template.html, or just save it like this inside of a folder called Chart.js template or whatever. And then every time we wanted to make something with Chart.js, we could just open this folder or copy it and start working, right? Because this is basically how we're always going to set up these projects. And you can see if we go back to our page, like there's still nothing here because we haven't actually added any content to it, but we do have everything set up at this point, so we can go ahead and jump right in and start working. Okay, so next we're going to look at creating a bar chart, and you could follow along on this document, which has everything that you need. And yeah, actually, why don't we just go ahead and keep doing that with the document? I think that makes sense. Okay, so now we're going to switch over and we're going to work in our javascript.js file. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add this little chunk of code right here. So we're going to go over to javascript.js, and we're going to add this little piece of JavaScript. And this will probably look familiar to you last week from the JavaScript intro that we did last week. So what we're doing is we're creating a variable, we're calling it CTX, and we're just grabbing an element, the ID of an element from our HTML. And you can notice we're grabbing that element with the ID of my chart. Okay, so if we go back over to our index, you can see we've got that canvas with the ID of my chart. So this is just saying, okay, we're grab that canvas HTML element, right? And we're basically going to add our chart to that, as you'll see in our next couple steps. Okay, so now we're going to create a new variable that we're calling my chart. Okay, and we're calling a Chart.js function called new chart, and we're attaching it to CTX, that variable that we created up here, right? So we're creating a new chart and we're adding it to this element, with HTML element, with the ID of my chart. And to start out our function, we're telling it what type of chart we want it to be, and we want it to be a bar chart. All right, let's go ahead and grab our data next. Okay, and we'll go ahead and paste that right below. Okay, so now that we have defined our two variables, we've told Chart.js what type of chart we want to make. Now we're going to enter our data. And in this point, we're going to, for this graphic, we're going to make a bar chart with 2 bars. And so we say, we create data right here, and then we've got 2 data sets that we're entering. And for each one, we're adding, first we're defining the labels for our bar chart, right, our x-axis, which is going to be these years, 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 data points we're going to have. And then we enter our 2 data sets, and we're going to show the number of apples and the number of oranges for each of those years. Okay, you can see we're adding the label, the data, and the background color. And the way this is set up, obviously this is dummy data, but in a minute we'll swap this out with real data. And the way that Chart.js works is we'll start with this code template, and we'll be able to just add in change it to add in our own data later, which is what makes Chart.js very easy. And you'll see there's lots of options that we can play with also to sort of customize things. And now we're going to add in our options, okay? So next, we're going to copy and paste this and put it right below the data section. So we're just going to keep going down, right? So first we define the chart type, then we add our data, and now finally, we add in our options. And you can see, let's take a look at some of the options that we're defining in this particular chart. First, we're just saying that we want it to be responsive. And then we're adding a couple of what they call plugins, which is allowing us to add a title. So we're adding a little title section here. And the title for our graphic is going to be apples and oranges by year. And we're saying that we want that to be font size 18. And then we're adding a little subtitle and display true, right? Just means show it. If it said display false, it would hide it. And for our subhead text, we want it to say, for all but 1 year, oranges outnumbered apples. Again, just dummy data. And then we're going to add one more thing under options. We're going to add something called scales, and we're going to apply something to our Y scale. And we're basically just telling it, hey, begin this at 0 because it's a bar chart. And that's it, right? And now finally, we just need to close that variable. And now let's go ahead and save that file. And let's see if our chart worked. And it did. Great. So you can see we very easily created this like dummy bar chart that shows 2 bars for each year, one representing apples, one representing oranges. It included our headline and our subhead. You can see Chart.js automatically created a legend for our colors of bars. Which, by the way, let's take a look at how those colors came in. You can see when we defined our data up here, right, we put in a number for each year. So 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020, right? So that's for apples. So we do need to make sure that the data matches the labels. It has the same number. And then we're entering our background color. And we do the same thing for oranges, entering that via hex color. And this is a nice basic chart. It comes with a tooltip that's showing us when we hover over the bar, the values for that particular bar. And this is great, very customizable. And we can also change lots of other options in here to sort of make this more like what we might want it to look like. So now let's sort of take this a little bit further. this is interesting. You can kind of see some of the, you know, some of the ways that we might be able to use this. But let's add in our own data at this point, um, just to take this sort of to the next level. Okay. Um, so I guess the first thing we should do is let's add in a little bit of our own data. And to do that, let's take a look at the spreadsheet that I have some data in, and start thinking about what we might want to actually, hold on one second. Yeah, no, okay, let's just play with options for now, and then we'll add in some real data on our next chart. Okay, I think that might be an easier way to do it. Okay, so we added in a background color. Let's go ahead and add in like a border color as well. And so you can see this here is defining the background color. Well, we can very easily add a border color as well. Let's put a comma here and we'll say border color. It actually follows the same format. And we'll just give it a black border color. And let's add one more thing in too. Let's add in border width. Let's give it a border width of 1. Okay, and let's see. So that's applied to apples. Let's see how that looks. Here we can see this has got like the apples bar has like a border around it now, and we could make that border width like, let's make it 10 and just make it totally ridiculous. There we go. So you can see it's adding the border, right? And we could apply that to both of these. We could add it to the oranges as well. See if that works. Oops. See, this is a nice thing about JavaScript is it always lets you know when you screw up because things just stop working. Okay, I see. So border width equals 1. So what we would want is just up to there. I could just type it in again, but I'm trying to remember. Okay, good. All right, great. So now we've added in a border width. Let's play around with a couple other options. And of course, we could change these colors, right, just by adding in a different hex code here, etc. Now let's make it a stacked bar chart instead of a grouped bar chart. So let's go under options, and we're going to go under scales here. And I'm just going to add a little bit of code here. So I'm going to replace my current scales code with this, which says, for our X scale, stacked equals true. For our Y scale, stacked equals true. And let's save that. You can see now we have a stacked bar chart, which is showing apples and oranges stacked on top of each other instead of 2 bars next to each other for each year. We could also make this a horizontal bar chart by adding in some options as well. And to do that, we would go also under options. We'll go up to the top of options in this case. And where it says responsive equals true, let's add one more under that. And let's make it say index axis equals Y. And then that is going to switch the axis to come off so that our main axis is the y-axis and our stacked bars come out off of that. Of course, we could also get rid of the stacked bars, and these could be grouped bars. Okay, so that is our basic bar chart, and you could modify this in any number of ways. Obviously, we could add in our own data, we could add in more bars, and we'll do all that in the future exercise here in 1 second. I did want to really quickly go over some of the documentation at Chart.js, just so you can understand how I figured out how to do all this stuff, okay? Now for our basic chart types here, you guys are going to have starting code, right? You're going to have code, you're going to have this basic bar chart that I just showed, the bar chart with extras, which is what we just went over. And I'm also going to give you code for a line chart and a scatter plot today, and then for a polar area chart and a radar chart next week. So you'll have nice starting code that works right out of the box. But of course, anytime you put in your own data, you're going to want to modify that and add things and change things and etc. And you want to know how to do that. You're also, of course, going to sometimes want a different type of chart than what's available here. So let's see what Chart.js offers us. Okay, if we go to documentation, we're going to have all kinds of stuff here. So if we go under, let's see here, getting started, there's lots of information. This is going to be, I've kind of walked you guys through a lot of this, or at least given you the way that I install and integrate it. There's lots of other ways if you want to read that. But here under general, we're going to have, this is how, going to show you different ways to add colors. It's also going to show how to add fonts, right? So if you wanted to change the font size or the font of your different labels, this shows you how to, the syntax for that. It gives you some other options and how to add padding. If you go down under configuration, we're going to have lots more stuff, right? Things about how to play around with your legends, how to add titles and subtitles and modify your tooltips. And this is basically how I learned how to do all this stuff. Is I decided, okay, hey, I want to add a title now, I want to add a subtitle, I want to mess with my tooltips, and I would just come in here and look at their code examples and integrate that into my own code. The code that they have here in Chart.js is not really plug and play, which is why I've given you plug and play code so that you have good starting points. These are more code examples for how you would use, how you would do these things integrated into your own code, right? So you could look how things are done here and then look at your own code and try to figure out how to integrate it. This also gives you lots of different chart types. And again, not exactly plug and play, but if you look under setup, you'll be able to easily integrate what the code they give you here with the code that I provided for you. And it shows you bubble charts and donut charts and line charts and mixed chart types. It took me a little while to get my head around the Chart.js documentation, but once I understood it, it was very easy to use. And also there's lots out there, lots of other tutorials and questions and answers on Google. So if you're having a hard time figuring out, for instance, how to modify a tooltip, if you Google how to modify a tooltip in Chart.js, you'll usually find some answers out there. Oh, and also, I'm available to help. Don't ever hesitate to reach out if you're having a problem. Okay, the other really nice part of the Chart.js documentation is here under samples, where they show you different types, sort of more advanced examples, for instance, of bar charts, right? This is how I figured out how to do a stacked bar chart, or a vertical bar chart, or you could do floating bars, or make them with these weird radiuses, right? And if you look through the code down here, it's going to show you how to change your options in the chart that you already have to accomplish that, right? So there's lots of sort of more interesting chart types or things that you might want to do to match your specific data. Okay, so just keeping in mind that I think there's a lot of resources out there for you, sort of starting with this Charts.js class guide, then moving on to the documentation in Charts.js, and also using Google. Okay, with that said, let's go ahead and take our bar chart that we have here, our stacked bar chart, and let's turn it into a line chart. So let me just open up my sample code so I can get ready to show you guys this here. And let's walk through it. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of some of this stuff that we added in a minute ago. I don't want this to be a stacked bar chart, and I don't want this to be running off the y-axis, so I just Control Z'd a little bit there to get myself back to this regular bar chart. Okay, cool. So the first thing I want to do is I want to change this to a line chart, and that is really easy to do with Chart.js, right? If we go up here, under type, we just change bar to line, and that is automatically going to sort of create a little line chart for us, which is great. And luckily, for this example, the setup for a bar chart and a line chart are really similar, so this transferred to a line chart super easily. but we have lots more options with the line chart. So let's go ahead and add and change a few things just to get our line chart looking a little bit better. And we'll just start with apples and oranges here, and then we'll add in our real data in just 1 second. Okay, so let's look at what background color and border color do for line charts. And I'm gonna copy in some slightly different code here. So under data, I'm going to copy in this code here. And so what we're looking at, and actually let me go ahead and do it for oranges too, just so we're being consistent. Oh, I broke something. All right, let's get that back to where it worked. Good, okay. Let me just copy and paste this whole little section here so we don't have to screw around with this for too long. Oh man, off to a good start here. So data. Oh, got 2 of those. Okay, great. Okay, so you can see I sort of cleaned things up a little bit, and let's see how I did that. Okay, so with the line chart, right, we're bringing in our data in exactly the same way. We've got our labels. We're calling in our data sets, and first we're adding the label, which is number of apples, right, for our red chart here, which is just displaying it up there in the legend. Then we've got our data for each year, right, 2015, 2016, 17, 18, 19, and 20. Now we're saying fill equals true, right, which is making this, you can see it's filling in that area right there, and making it an area chart essentially, right? If we said true equals false, it would just be a more traditional, at least on that line, it would just be a more traditional line chart. But we'll just go ahead and leave this equals true. Okay, now we've got 2 options here, border color and background color. So our border color, and in this case, you can see instead of using hex, we're using RGB colors, which is fine. You know, Chart.js will accept either. We could just use hexes here if you're more comfortable with that. It doesn't matter. I'm just kind of trying to show you some different ways. So the border color is obviously this color right here, this dark red. And the background color is the red here that we're seeing in the area. You can see that has a little bit of opacity to it, right? And that's what I'm defining here. I'm saying that's the 4. So this is the R, the red, the green, the blue. You see red, green, blue. But the 0.1 is an additional value that I'm adding one that gives it an opacity, which is good for the area chart, especially since we have 2 lines with areas. And then I'm adding a little bit of tension, which is just like making the bar slightly curvy there. I'm sorry, the line, I keep saying the bar. So if we made that 0, you would see it would be like a much straighter line. If I made it like 9, it would be like, 9. It would be a crazy wiggly line, which is not what I want. So I just give it 0.1 just to make it just not quite so harsh, but you definitely don't have to do that. It's just something that I did here. So for oranges, exact same thing, label, the data, we're filling it as you can see with our orange line. We're giving it a border color, an orange border color. We're giving it a background color where we include a little opacity value at the end and a tension of 1. So that's great. I really like this a lot. So let's go ahead and add in some real data here. I think that'll be a nice next step. So what I want to do is I want to add in some real countries, and then I want to modify one thing about the tooltip. So let's look at our data. So I've got top 50 countries by population. Let's see if we've got... Okay, so we've got the top countries by population, and I've got their life expectancy here, etc. So I basically just pulled out like the top 10 for life expectancy. Let's see if I've got that data somewhere here. Um, and I want to create like a line chart that looks at that over time. So let's go ahead and modify a few things here to make that happen. So the first thing I want to modify is I want to change my labels here. So I've actually got many, many more labels. Let's see if we can do a word wrap so we can see all those. Okay, so we've got, I'm looking at every 25 years between 1800 and 2000. So that means we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years of data, right? Which means we're going to have 9 data values for each of our data sets as well. So first I want to add in, so the first country I'm going to do, and we'll just set up 2 here to get us started. So we'll do China, and I want to add in my new data. Okay, which I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, perfect. And I'm going to change my colors a little bit. Just do a different background and border color. And actually, I don't want to fill it. I want to make that. So, okay, great. And just to let you guys know, the background color is also like the background. It's the background of those circles, but we'll see when we update this. Okay, so next I want it to be India, and I'll add in my new data, and let's just copy and paste this stuff over. All right, so now we can see, right, instead of apples and oranges, this is no longer apples and oranges by year, so we'll need to update the headline and the subhead. But we've added in 2 new bars, right? It's got each of our new years that we added in down here at the bottom, and it's got our new lines and our new data points for India and China. That's great. Let's go ahead and change our title and our subtitle now. So just so we don't forget. Okay, so for title, I want you to say life expectancy in the 5 most populous countries in the world. And for my subtitle, say life expectancy has risen steadily in the last 100 years. Okay, great. So this is really coming together. Now let's add in some more countries, right? I have, let's just go ahead and add in 1 first. So next I want to add in the United States. And so you can see we've got our data sets here. You can see this is a data set, right? In there, each data set, so all of the data sets exist between these 2 brackets here that we see in yellow, and each data set exists inside of those curly brackets, and they're separated with a comma. The last data set, you'll notice, does not have a comma after it. Okay, so I want to put a comma after that curly bracket, and now I'll enter another data set. I've got one here for the US, and spacing's a little off. And that doesn't matter. This would still display, but for my own ease of readability of the code, I want to fix that. And that should work. So you see we've got the US, we've added the data, and then we've got our colors that we've defined for the US, which in this case is yellow. Okay, and we can see the US life expectancy. All right, so let's go ahead and add in, looks like I've got 1, 2, I got a couple more, 2 more. So I want to put a comma after that curly bracket there because there's more data coming. And I'll go ahead and paste in those 2, and we'll refresh. And that's awesome, right? We've got in life expectancy for the 5 most populous countries in the world. And yeah, there we go. You know, I've already arranged these by size, but the legend is going to show up by the order in which you've entered your data here. So if you wanted to rearrange them, you could just rearrange the order of your data. One extra thing that I'd like to do, actually there's 2 extra things that I'd like to do. First, this is cool, this tooltip, it's great. We can hover over each dot. But you know what might be nice is if when you hovered over each dot, it showed you the life expectancy for all those countries for that year, and then we wouldn't have to hover as much. Um, and I did a little bit of research, and there's actually like a super easy way we can do that. Um, and so we want to do that, of course, under options. So if we go down to options, under responsive equals true, we're going to just add one little piece of code here that says interaction. We want to add this interaction. Intersect equals false and mode equals index. I don't know what that means, but it does work, and I used the documentation to figure out how to do this. So if we hit save, we can see as we intersect with each dot now, it's going to show us all of the countries for that specific year. And I think that's actually like a nice user thing. I think it makes this chart a little bit better. Okay, finally, what I'd like to add here is like a source down at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And actually, I want to use our style sheet a little bit too, I think, at this point. Yeah, let's go ahead. So right now, okay, let's go ahead and add a couple more things, and we're going to move out of our JavaScript now. So let's say you wanted to resize this chart. Right now, this chart is just taking up like our entire canvas. So if we go over to our index, we can see, right, we've got this canvas tag, and that's where our chart's appearing. But what we could do is we could put that canvas tag inside of a div, and we could style the div and resize it to basically any size that we want, right? So I'm going to make a div with a class that equals chart container. And I'm just going to wrap that canvas tag inside my div, right? So now the canvas that has the chart in it exists inside of this div, and I can style that div however I want over here in my style sheet. So let's go ahead and we'll just make it really simple. We'll just add a little style that says chart container, right? Target the class of chart container and make it a width of 800. And you can see now it just resized it, so it's got a width of 800. You know, we could also make that like width equals 50%, and it would make it like 50% of the page. Maybe we want to make it like 80% of the page, a little bit bigger. And we could also center it on the page just by doing like margin equals 0 auto. Now it's centered, and so this would be helpful. Like, let's say you had several charts that you wanted to place on a page, or you wanted to control the size of this. This is a good way to do it, right? You just wrap the canvas that has your chart in it in a div, and then you style the div. Okay, great. So the other thing I'd like to add is I'd like to add a little source, and I'm going to go ahead and do that just in the HTML. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just right here inside that same div, but right below the canvas, I'm just going to say, okay, source, and it is Gapminder. We'll just say that for now. Okay, and it added that there. I'd actually like to style that a little bit. So why don't I say, okay, let's make another div and give that a class of source. And we'll just wrap that source in that. And then I can style .source, and it'll style whatever I have there. Okay, so why don't I'm going to add a number of styles for source. Okay, so I'm going to give it a font family of Helvetica. I'm going to make it a little small. I'm going to give it a little bit of margin, so it has a margin from the left side. I'm going to give it a little bit of margin, right? A margin over here, and also a margin from the top. And I'm going to make it italic. There, so that cleans that up quite a bit, right? And that looks like a much nicer source. But you could style that however you wanted. Great. Okay, so I'm really very happy with this chart. It turned out great. And as you can see, these graphics, you know, they're really very customizable, right? We started out with some silly chart about apples and oranges. We added in our own data. We added more data. We customized things. We added in options. We added in titles and subtitles. We changed colors and ended up with something really nice and interactive that we can use in a web page. Okay, so the final thing I want to go over today, and I'm not going to go ahead and type this one up. I just want to show you guys scatter plot. So I'm just going to pop that code open and we'll take a look at it. Okay. So let me get that up on the screen for you. All right, let's close this down and let's close this guy down. Okay, so this is our scatter plot code. And, it's set up the exact same way. I haven't changed anything at all in the index or the style sheet. It's exactly what we just had for our line chart. But the JavaScript file is a little bit different. Let's go ahead and pop that up in a browser so we can see what it all looks like. Okay, so what we've got here is a scatter plot that looks at GDP, right? So it's got we've only got 3 dots here, right? One for China, one for the US, and one for India. Okay, and we've got some spaces for our x-axis title and our y-axis title. And this chart very purposely isn't finished yet because you guys are going to work on this a little bit as part of your exercise for this week. Okay, but what I want to show you is sort of how the code is set up and how it's just ever so slightly different from the bar chart and the line chart. Okay, so it starts out the same way. We're calling in our get element by ID and calling the my chart ID. We're creating a new variable called my chart. Of course, for the type, we're saying scatter, right? It's not line or bar, it's a scatter plot. And now we can see so we've got our data sets, and our data is just set up just a little bit different, okay? Because for each data point, we need an X value and a Y value, and that is setting up, and it's creating our scatter plot based on that, right? So X is 71.5, and Y is 3,678. And maybe it'd be useful if we took a look at the actual data that is behind this. So this is looking at GDP. So what it's looking at is life expectancy and GDP. So we've got life expectancy here and GDP on the y-axis, right? So if we take a look here, right, that's the X is our life expectancy for that country, and the Y is the GDP for that country. And we're just plotting those two things. We're giving it a label. So the first one is China. We're giving it a border color and a background color. And in this case, what those mean is the border color is the stroke around the circle, and the background color is the color that's filling the circle. Okay, so you can see China right here at 71.5 years and GDP of 3,678. And then we just add that for each of them, right? Next, we added a data point for India. Then we added a data point for the US. And we could copy and paste and add as many of these as we wanted. And really not much else is different. I haven't added much in options here. I've just added scales. So for the Y scale, I've added, right, some text. And of course, we'd want the Y scale to say GDP. We could go ahead and change that, GDP. And the X axis to say life expectancy. And, we'd want to add like a title here, and we'd want to add a subhead, and I've already got the source, but right, there's lots of ways that this can be improved. But I just wanted to give you guys like a basic template for a scatter plot and pull all the extras out so that you could see how that worked. So that's basically what I've got for this week for Chart.js. And I think it's actually kind of good that we did this asynchronously this week, and you guys have a video so you can look back on it. But in general, I think you should have what you need by looking at the class guide here, which has links to all of the code we went over, right? Like you could click here and it'll take you to a GitHub repo that has all this code for the scatter plot and all of, got all the code for the line chart and the 2 bar charts that we did and the code for our starting template. So you guys can really just use those and add in your own data, and that's really as far as you need to take Chart.js in this class, but you can, if you're so inclined, take it so much further, and we'll talk about how to do that next week. And you could also look through the documentation and figure it out. So there's an exercise I'd like you guys to work on for this lab, and I think it'll be fairly simple for you. So it's going to use the same Gapminder data, which there's a link to right here. And so it says using the bar chart code that we reviewed in class, create a simple bar chart that shows GDP per capita by region. That data can be found in the tab GDP per capita by region, right? So that's right here. So just make a simple little bar chart using the data right there. Next, make a line chart following the data that we created in class that shows life expectancy. Following the tab life expectancy in the largest countries of the world over time. So here we go. This is a little bit more complex data. And finally, create a scatter plot, starting with the scatter plot code we just looked at. And all I'm going to have you do is add in a little bit of extra stuff, right? Label the axes, add in a title and subtitle, change the color palette, and add in 2 more data points. Okay, so this should be simple enough. And when you're done, just push it to a GitHub repo, and you could submit the link to GitHub pages on Elms. Any problems with that, just let me know. Any problems with anything, just let me know. Good luck, and I'll see you guys soon. Thanks.